The sound of a house dying isn't a bang. It's the sound of a digital notification at 3 a.m. It's the sound of a highlighter scraping against a calendar. It's the silence that follows when you realize you're no longer a husband, but a line item in a spreadsheet. I used to think the walls of our home absorbed our laughter. We had a lot of it back then. But lately, the walls only seem to echo the sound of ticking clocks and the soft tapping of Sarah's phone screen as she scrolls through the Sovereign Path forums. My name is Elias. I am 33 years old. I work as a senior analyst for a logistics firm. My brain is wired for efficiency, for flow, for ensuring that point A connects to point B without friction. For 7 years, my marriage to Sarah was the one thing that didn't need analyzing. It just worked. Or so I told myself while I was busy being the person I thought a man was supposed to be. Let's talk about the before times. Not because I'm sentimental, but because you need to see the baseline to understand the fall. Sarah and I met in a coffee shop when I was 25. She had dropped an expensive-looking textbook on the floor, and I had picked it up. Standard rom-com start. She was bubbly, driven, and had a smile that felt like a warm radiator in a cold room. We got married 2 years later. It was a traditional wedding, but we joked about it. "I promise to love you even when you leave your wet towels on the floor," she'd said. "I promise to protect you from spiders and mediocre movies," I'd replied. It felt like a team. I was the primary earner, but she had a solid career in interior design. My salary covered the mortgage, the insurance, the big-ticket items. Her salary was the fun money and the savings for the future. I never questioned it. I liked the feeling of being the provider. When the gutters got clogged, I was on the ladder. When her car made a strange rattling noise, I was the one at the mechanic on Saturday morning while she slept in. When the basement flooded in 2021, I spent 3 days in knee-deep water with a wet vac so she wouldn't have to ruin her shoes. I did it because I loved her. I did it because it felt like the natural order of things. She would call me her rack. She would bring me a beer while I was under the sink fixing a leak. She would tell her friends how lucky she was to have a real man who knew how to handle things. It felt good. It felt balanced. Then, a year ago, Sarah met Chloe. Chloe was a life synergy consultant, which is a fancy way of saying she got paid to tell unhappy women that their husbands were the reason they felt unfulfilled. Chloe was divorced, bitter, and possessed a vocabulary made entirely of academic buzzwords used out of context. At first, it was just a few weekend brunches. Then it was empowerment retreats. Then the books started appearing on the nightstand. The Myth of the Helpmeet, Dismantling the Domestic Cage, The Invisible Labor of the Modern Woman. I didn't pay much attention. I figured it was a phase, like her brief obsession with sourdough or hot yoga. But the language in the house started to change. I'd come home from a 10-hour shift and ask what was for dinner. Why is it my default responsibility to manage the nutritional output of this household? She'd ask. I just thought we could figure out what to eat, I'd say, confused. You're offloading the cognitive load onto me, Elias. That's emotional labor. My face when I just wanted a taco. I started doing the cooking, not because I had to, but to keep the peace. But even then, I was doing it wrong. If I bought groceries, I was dominating the domestic sphere. If I didn't buy groceries, I was weaponizing my incompetence. I was trapped in a logic loop that had no exit strategy. The handsome handyman comments stopped. Now, when I fixed the toilet, I was performing a role to maintain a patriarchal hierarchy of utility. Sarah, the toilet was literally overflowing, I told her one Tuesday. You only fix it so you can feel superior, she snapped. You use your skills as a way to keep me dependent on you. I stared at the wrench in my hand. It was just a tool, but to her, it was a scepter of oppression. Everything was a microaggression.
If I opened the car door for her, it was benevolent sexism. If I offered to pay for dinner on her birthday, it was financial infantilization. I felt like I was walking through a minefield in my own living room. Then came the night of the intervention. Chloe was there. They were sitting on our sofa, the sofa I had paid for and spent 4 hours assembling. Sarah looked at me with a cold, clinical detachment. Chloe looked at me like I was a specimen under a microscope. "Elias, we need to discuss the restructuring of this cohabitation unit," Sarah said, not "our marriage, this cohabitation unit." Chloe chimed in. "Arthur, Sarah has realized that her identity has been subsumed by your dominant energy. To find her true north, she needs a boundary-rich environment." "What does that even mean?" I asked. Sarah handed me a folder, a literal physical folder. Inside was a document titled The Equitable Autonomy Agreement. It was 12 pages long. It had sections, it had subsections, it had an appendix. It wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a business merger between two parties who hated each other. Rule number 1, complete financial autonomy. We would no longer have a joint account. Every expense, down to the last rolls of toilet paper, would be split 50-50. Rule number 2, domestic task segregation. A chore wheel was attached. Every task was assigned a labor value based on time and complexity. Rule number 3, the physical boundary. Sarah was moving into the guest room to reclaim my physical space from the male gaze, she explained. I wasn't allowed in her room without a 24-hour notice, no exceptions.
Rule number 4, emotional independence. "I am not your therapist and you are not mine," Sarah said. "We will no longer engage in unsolicited emotional dumping. If we need to talk about our feelings, we will schedule a check-in every second Sunday." I looked at Chloe. She was nodding like she was witnessing the signing of the Magna Carta. "Sarah, this is insane," I said. "We're married. We love each other." "Love is a social construct used to keep women in a state of compliant servitude," Chloe whispered. Sarah looked me dead in the eye. "Sign it, Elias, or I'm leaving. I won't live in a cage anymore." I looked around the room. I saw the photos on the mantel, the ones of us in Italy, laughing. I saw the house I had worked 60-hour weeks to afford. I saw the woman I loved, who now looked at me like I was a landlord she was trying to sue. Something broke in me that night. It wasn't a loud break. It was the sound of a flame going out. I had been trying to hold the walls up, and she was the one pulling the bricks out from the bottom. I realized then that you can't save something that the other person wants to destroy. But I wasn't ready to lose the house yet, and I was tired, so very tired of arguing. "Fine," I said. I picked up a pen. Chloe smirked. Sarah looked relieved, a triumphant glint in her eyes. I signed every page. I signed the appendix. I even signed the chore wheel. "From now on," I said, my voice as cold as the guest room she was moving into, "we follow these rules, to the letter. No deviations, no emotional dumping, no patriarchal overreach." Sarah nodded. "Finally, we can have a truly equitable partnership." Chloe stood up. "You've done a brave thing today, Sarah. You've reclaimed your power." They went into the kitchen to celebrate with a bottle of wine that Sarah had bought with her money, I noticed. I went into the bedroom, my bedroom now, and started moving my things. The next morning was the first day of the new era. I woke up at 6 a.m. Usually, I'd make a pot of coffee for both of us. I'd bring her a cup in bed. Not today. Rule number 2, individual morning sustenance. I made exactly 1 cup of coffee in the AeroPress. I drank it while looking at the chore wheel on the fridge. Monday, pink section, S. That's you. She frowned. "But you're already heading out the door. It's right there." "Taking it out for you would be an act of domestic assumption," I said. "I wouldn't want to imply that you're incapable of managing your assigned tasks. That would be patronizing." She huffed and grabbed the bag. She didn't realize I had put a heavy glass bottle at the bottom. The bag ripped slightly. "Elias, it's leaking." "Section 4.2, spillages are the responsibility of the current task holder," I quoted. I walked out the door. The drive to work felt different. I wasn't worrying about what Sarah wanted for dinner. I wasn't thinking about the rattling noise in her SUV. I was just Elias. I spent the day being efficient. That evening, I came home to find Sarah struggling with a large box in the hallway. It was a new bookshelf she had ordered online. In the before times, I would have had it assembled in 20 minutes. I would have used my power tools and made sure it was anchored to the wall. I walked past her. "Elias, can you help me with this? It's heavy." I looked at the box. "Did we schedule a collaborative domestic event for this evening?" She blinked. "No, I can't get the screws to line up." Subsection 8, assembly of personal property is the sole responsibility of the owner. Unless, I added, you want to hire me as a contractor. What? According to our financial separation clause, my time outside of communal chores has a market value. I'll do it for $40 an hour, 1 hour minimum. Her face went through 3 different shades of red. "You're kidding. You're my husband." "No," I said calmly. "According to the folder, I am a cohabitant in an equitable autonomy agreement. Husbands do things out of love. Cohabitants work on contracts." She slammed the hammer down. "Forget it. I'll do it myself." "I look forward to seeing the finished product," I said, and went to my room to read a book. I could hear her swearing in the hallway for 3 hours. At 10 p.m., there was a loud thud, then a cry of pain. I didn't move.
Rule number 4. Emotional and physical autonomy. If it was an emergency, she'd call 911. 10 minutes later, she knocked on my door. "Elias, I think I hit my thumb with the hammer. It's really swollen." I looked at the clock. "It's past 10 p.m., Sarah. I'm off duty." "Off duty? My thumb is purple." "You can find the first aid kit in the hall closet. It's a communal resource. I'm sure you can manage the application of a bandage." She stood there, her eyes welling up. "You're being so cold." "I'm being equitable," I corrected. "If I were to rush out and comfort you, I would be assuming a protective role that you've explicitly stated is a tool of oppression. I'm respecting your strength, Sarah." She turned and walked away. I felt a twinge of guilt, but then I remembered the way Chloe had looked at me. I remembered the word cage. I went back to my book. The first month was a series of these small battles. Sarah was learning that autonomy was expensive. When her SUV's check engine light came on, she had to take it to the shop herself. She had to pay the $400 bill out of her fund money. Usually, I'd affix the sensor for $20 and a Saturday morning. When a storm knocked a branch through the fence, she waited for me to fix it. I didn't. After a week, she asked when I was going to get to it. "The fence is on the north side of the property," I said. "According to the plot division we agreed on, the north fence is your responsibility." She had to hire a landscaper, another $300. I saw her looking at her bank app more and more often. The fun money was disappearing into the survival money. But she was stubborn. She'd spend her evenings on the phone with Chloe, reinforcing her boundaries. I could hear Chloe's voice through the wall. "He's trying to break you, Sarah. He's using financial violence by not helping." "He's just following the rules I wrote," Sarah would whisper. "Then he's a narcissist," Chloe would declare. I just smiled. It's amazing how equality feels like narcissism when you're the one losing the perks. The real test, however, didn't come until the winter. We live in the Midwest. Winter here isn't a season, it's a siege. In December, we got hit with a massive ice storm, the kind that turns the driveway into a skating rink and snaps power lines like dry twigs. I woke up at 5 a.m. to the sound of the world cracking outside. The power was out. The house was already losing heat. I got up, dressed in my heavy wool layers, and went to the basement. I had prepared for this. I had a generator. I had extra fuel.
I had the wood-burning stove in the den cleaned and ready. I started a fire. The den began to warm up. I hooked my small space heater and my fridge to the generator. I made a hot breakfast on the camping stove. Sarah came downstairs around 7 a.m., wrapped in 3 blankets. Her room was on the corner of the house. It was freezing. She saw me sitting by the stove, drinking hot tea. "Elias, the power is out." I noticed. "It's freezing in the guest room. I can see my breath." "That's unfortunate. The insulation on that side of the house was always a bit weak." She looked at the stove. Can I sit in here?" I looked at the agreement. "The den is a communal space, Sarah. You're welcome to use it." She sat down, shivering. "The generator. Can we plug my heater in too?" I shook my head. "The generator is personal property. I bought it 2 years ago with my discretionary income. It wasn't listed as a communal resource in the agreement." "Elias, are you serious? I'm freezing." "I have a contract for power sharing," I said, pulling a piece of paper from my pocket. "I've been expecting this. I'll provide you with 500 watts of power and access to the stove's heat for $20 a day plus 50% of the fuel costs." She stared at me, her mouth agape. "You're charging me for heat? We're in a state of emergency." "We're in a state of autonomy," I corrected. "You didn't want to be dependent on my male provider energy. Providing heat and power is a significant labor and financial investment. It would be an insult to your independence to just give it to you. You're not a charity, Sarah. You're an equal partner." She started to cry. Not the angry cry I was used to, a real, cold, desperate cry. "I can't believe this is happening. I just wanted to be respected." "I am respecting you. I meant it. I'm treating you exactly like the independent, self-sufficient adult you claim to be. If I were to treat you like a wife, protecting you, warming you, taking care of the bills, you told me that would be a cage. I've opened the door, Sarah. This is what it looks like on the outside." She stayed in the den, paying the $20 via Venmo with trembling fingers. We sat in silence for 2 days as the storm raged. I offered no unsolicited emotional dumping. I didn't ask how she felt. I didn't offer her a hug. I just maintained the fire and checked the generator. On the 3rd day, the ice began to melt, and that's when the real disaster hit.
I was in the basement checking the sump pump when I heard it. A sound like a gunshot, then the roar of rushing water. A pipe in the upstairs bathroom, the one in her suite, had frozen and burst. I ran up the stairs. Water was pouring out from under her door. It was already cascading down the stairs into the foyer. Sarah was standing in the middle of her room, water spraying everywhere, screaming, "Elias, help! It won't stop! The water won't stop!" I stood in the doorway. I didn't step inside. "Sarah, you're in your private physical boundary." "The pipe burst! Elias, do something!" "I don't have a 24-hour notice to enter," I said, my voice raised over the sound of the flood. "And according to Section 9, maintenance of private suites is the responsibility of the occupant." "I don't know where the shutoff is. Everything is getting ruined." She was frantic, trying to block the water with towels. It was useless. "The shutoff is in the basement," I said, "but my labor as a plumber is currently valued at a premium for emergency calls, $100 for the first 15 minutes. She looked at me, and for the first time, she didn't see a patriarchal oppressor. She didn't see a narcissist. She saw a man who was letting her world drown because she had told him he wasn't allowed to save it. "Please," she shrieked, "just fix it. I'll pay anything. Just make it stop." I walked down to the basement and turned the main valve. The roaring stopped. The house went silent, save for the drip, drip, drip of ruined drywall. I walked back up. Sarah was sitting on her bed, her feet in 2 inches of water, her head in her hands. I stood in the hallway. "The water is off. I'll send you the invoice for the emergency call." She didn't look up.
Is this what you wanted? To watch me fail? No, I said. This is what you wanted, to not need me. You've achieved it, Sarah. You're standing in a flooded room, in a cold house, with a purple thumb and a bank account that's empty. But hey, you're autonomous. I turned to walk away. Elias, wait! I stopped. I think I made a mistake. I didn't turn around. We can discuss that during our scheduled check-in next Sunday, I said. I went to my room and closed the door. That night, the silence was different. It wasn't the silence of a cold war. It was the silence of a graveyard. I realized then that I didn't want to be right anymore. I just wanted to be gone. But the story doesn't end there, because a few weeks later, I met Maya. But before we get to Maya, we have to talk about the fallout. We have to talk about the day Sarah called Chloe to help her clean up the water damage. And we have to talk about what happened when the sovereign woman found out that cleaning up a flood doesn't involve any buzzwords. It involves a mop.
Sarah spent the next morning calling Chloe. I sat in the den, finishing my breakfast and reviewing my investment portfolio. I could hear them through the vent. Sarah was crying again, her voice sounding raw and small. Chloe, the ceiling is literally sagging. There's mold starting to grow. My furniture is ruined. This is just the house purging its old energy, Sarah. Chloe's voice came back, sounding annoyingly serene. You're in the messy middle of your transformation. Elias is using his silence as a weapon. He's practicing withholding labor to force you back into submission. He's not withholding labor, Chloe. He's charging me for it, and I'm out of money. Ask her to come over and help, I whispered to the empty room. 10 minutes later, Sarah came out. Chloe is coming over to help me mop. We're going to clear the negative domestic vibes together. Great, I said. According to Section 11, any third-party labor must be logged for liability purposes. Hope she's got non-slip shoes. Chloe arrived an hour later. She was wearing a beige lemon outfit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She walked into the foyer, took one look at the water-stained walls and the damp carpet, and covered her nose with a silk scarf. The stagnant water energy here is incredibly toxic, Sarah, Chloe said. Sarah handed her a heavy-duty mop. I know. Can you start in the dining room? I'm going to try to scrub the guest room floor. Chloe looked at the mop like it was a live snake. Oh, Sarah, honey, I would love to, but my energetic alignment is focused on consultation, not physical remediation. I'm here to hold space for you while you do the work. My face when Chloe literally watched Sarah mop for 4 hours while sitting on a dry chair and talking about the divinity of the struggle. Sarah was exhausted, her hair matted with sweat and dust. Every time she asked Chloe to help move a piece of furniture, Chloe would say her back chakra was closed or that she didn't want to interfere with the physical manifestation of Sarah's journey. By 3 p.m., Chloe had an urgent soul sync session and left. Sarah was left alone in a house that still smelled like a wet basement. I walked into the kitchen to make a sandwich. Sarah was leaning against the counter, her hands shaking. Chloe didn't do a single thing, she whispered, mostly to herself. Of course not, I said, slicing a tomato. Consultants provide jargon. Spouses provide labor. You traded the labor for the jargon, Sarah. That's the market. Why are you being so mean? I'm not being mean, I'm being precise. This is the sovereign path you chose. It's a very lonely road, isn't it? I took my sandwich to my room. I didn't offer her a bite. Rule number 2. Personal nutritional maintenance. A week later, I attended a regional logistics summit. I was sitting in the back of a seminar on supply chain resilience when I met Maya. She was 31, a manager for a shipping fleet. She had a sharp mind and a laugh that didn't sound like it was filtered through a self-help blog. We grabbed coffee during the break. She talked about her job, about the beauty of things working the way they're supposed to. No buzzwords, no talk of holding space, just reality. I like things that make sense, she said, leaning back in her chair. Life is complicated enough. Why make your home a puzzle too? I felt like I was breathing real oxygen for the first time in a year. I told her I was in the middle of a cohabitation transition. She didn't ask for details, she just nodded. Well, hope the transition leads somewhere with less friction, she said, handing me her card. I went home that night and looked at the house. It was quiet. Sarah was in her room. The repairs were beginning, paid for by a personal loan Sarah had taken out. She couldn't afford a contractor for the whole job, so she was trying to paint the walls herself. She was doing a terrible job. There were streaks and drips everywhere. In the before times, I would have taken the brush from her hand, kissed her forehead, and spent the weekend making it perfect. Now, I just walked past her door. "The paint you bought is water-based," I said through the doorway. "It won't stick to that oil-based primer you used." She looked at the wall, then at the peeling paint. She looked like she wanted to scream. How do I fix it? According to the Equitable Autonomy Agreement, specialized knowledge sharing is a billable consultation. But honestly, Sarah, I'm just too tired to invoice you. Figure it out. That was the moment I knew it was truly dead. I didn't even want her money anymore. I just wanted my peace. 2 weeks later, the Sunday check-in arrived. We sat at the dining table. Sarah had a stack of papers. She looked thin, pale. The sovereign life was taking its toll. "Elias," she started, her voice trembling, "I want to repeal rule number 3 and rule number 4. I leaned back in my chair. "Reasoning?" I miss my husband. I miss us. This house feels like a prison. I don't want to live in a room down the hall from the man I married." I looked at her. I tried to find the old spark, the feeling that made me want to climb ladders and fix toilets. It was gone. All I saw was a person who had tried to optimize my love into a contract and realized she was losing on the deal. "I'm sorry, Sarah, but the Equitable Autonomy Agreement states that any structural changes require mutual consent." "And you don't consent?" "No, I don't. I've discovered that I actually prefer this. I like only having to care about one person's happiness. Mine." "You can't be serious. You're doing this to punish me." "No," I said, and for the first time I felt a strange sense of pity. "You happened, Sarah. Chloe happened. The sovereign path happened. You took a man who would have died for you and turned him into a man who won't even buy you a light bulb." I stood up. "I'm moving out at the end of the month. I've already contacted a realtor. We'll sell the house and split the equity 50-50, just like the agreement says." "You're leaving me?" "No, you left me a year ago. I'm just finally catching the bus." I moved into a small, modern apartment downtown. It was clean, it was quiet, it was efficient. I had a standing Saturday date with Maya. We went to a museum last weekend. She tripped on a loose paving stone and I caught her arm. "Thanks," she said, smiling. She didn't call it benevolent sexism. She didn't analyze the power dynamic. She just squeezed my hand and we kept walking.
I heard from a mutual friend that Sarah had to move back in with her parents. Her interior design business had faltered because she couldn't focus. Chloe had stopped taking her calls months ago. Apparently, Sarah didn't have enough positive manifestation energy left to be worth Chloe's time. MFW, I realized that holding space is only for people with a high credit limit. Sometimes, at night, I think about the house in the suburbs. I think about the burst pipe and the wet towels. But then I look at my living room. There are no chore wheels on the fridge, no 24-hour notice required to enter the bedroom, no folders full of equitable autonomy. Just a man, a cup of coffee, and a life that finally makes sense. Logistics. Point A, point B, everything exactly where it's supposed to be. I am no longer a provider, a protector, or a specimen. I am just Elias. And for the first time in 33 years, That's exactly who I want to be. Freedom. It's the best contract I've ever signed.